Hi, this is video 2 of 3 for Unit 1, Responses of the Body System to a Single Bout of Exercise on the Muscular System, and we are looking at blood flow to muscles. You should have already listened to and watched muscle fibre recruitment. So we've got quite a few key terms to learn here, these are new ones. The first one is cardiac output, and this can be expressed as a Q, and you will often see a dot on the top. The dot stands for 1 minute. Cardiac output is the amount of blood flowing from the heart in 1 minute. You need to be aware of the vessel names, and this will be reinforced in Unit 2 with Messenia. So the vessel names are the artery, the arteriole, the capillary, the venule and the vein. Very different in structure. The artery is quite large in structure and it carries a lot of blood at quite a fast pace. It's quite muscly. The capillaries are very, very thin, and they will take one blood cell at a time through the vessel. They're usually in between the muscle fibres and they're around the vital organs. The veins are relatively thick, but they're not muscly like the arteries, and they will carry the blood back up towards the heart. The arterioles will bridge the gap between the artery and the capillaries, gradually getting smaller as they move towards a capillary, and the venules bridge the gap between a capillary and a vein, so they gradually increase in size until they get back to the vena cava, one of our biggest veins. Redirecting, I'm sure you know what that means, but redistribute is roughly the same thing, and it means to move, in this case blood, from one area to another area. Vasodilation refers to an increase in diameter of a blood vessel. So if this is the blood vessel in a cross-sectional area, this is the blood vessel dilated, where it has got bigger from its normal size, and this is called a constricted blood vessel, where it has got smaller than its normal size. To complete our key terms, we have hormones, which are responsible for making changes to the size of the blood vessels in the body. So let's have a look first at redistribution of blood and how blood is moved around the body. Please could you have a think about this and pause the video in a moment. Think what happens to the amount of blood flowing to the following body parts on commencement of exercise. So you've started exercising. What happens to the amount of blood flowing to the working muscles, those that are moving? What happens to the amount of blood going to the brain, the digestive system and the kidneys? Just make 1 or 2 notes on that, please, if you could pause the video. So the answers are, to the working muscles, the blood flow will increase significantly. That is because it is delivering oxygen and nutrients to the working muscles to allow contraction. The brain stays relatively stable for obvious reasons. If all the blood went to your muscles for contraction, you would be very fast, very efficient, but you wouldn't actually know what you were doing or be able to recall any of the skills that you were supposed to do. The digestive system, the amount of blood will reduce to the digestive system because it's not critical. So therefore it will be redistributed to the working muscles, and the kidneys, there is some reduction, but it is a major organ. So let's have a look at some numbers. Blood flow to the muscles at rest, 20% of blood is at the skeletal muscle, as opposed to during exercise when there is 86% skeletal muscle. So it goes from 20% at rest through to 86% during exercise. At rest, the blood is split between all the major organs, and don't forget the skin is an organ. It's the largest organ in our body. When we start to exercise, we've mentioned it, we reduce the blood to the digestive system because it isn't critical for the blood to be in the digestive system, so it will go to these working muscles instead. The same levels will be at the brain to allow the person to function. Here's a question for you, a challenge question for you. Why is blood required at the skin? It increases. The amount of blood in the skin increases. Do you know why? Just pause the video again for me and jot it down. So hopefully you got that right. The answer was to reduce body temperature. I go beetroot when I've been doing some exercise, and that's the blood coming to the capillaries, those tiny little blood vessels under the surface of the skin, to try and radiate the heat out of the body to stop you overheating. Well done. So blood is redistributed from the digestive system to the working muscles, and from some of the less important organs to the major muscles, the skeletal muscle. Some of the blood is then redistributed to the skin to allow cooling, to allow radiation of heat out of the body. But how does this occur? So I mentioned before that hormones are responsible for increasing the size or the diameter of the blood vessels, so vasodilating the vessels, and they're also responsible for vasoconstriction of the blood vessels. So for the areas that the blood is not required, vessels will vasoconstrict, and the areas where the blood is needed, the vessels will vasodilate, allowing more blood flow, increased blood flow. That's how distribution works. The diameter enlarges, notice a spelling mistake, apologies, and reduces to allow more or less blood through. How does that happen? Well, in the case of the arteries, we've got smooth muscle inside the wall of that nice thick artery, so it is actually able to dilate the blood vessel and make the diameter much larger. So it's dependent on the need. So they will dilate if blood is required. They will constrict if blood is not required. But why is blood required? Well, it's required for two things: oxygen and nutrients. Oxygen required for muscle contraction. Nutrients required for muscle contraction. So as long as there is movement, these two elements are being used up, so blood needs to be taken to those areas to replace the oxygen and the nutrients that the body has just used. So here's a couple of questions I quite often get asked. So is more blood produced when you are exercising? So yes and no, in a way. More blood is not made. We don't make more blood within a single session of exercise, but more blood is pumped to the body because the heart rate increases. So it's the same amount of blood in the system, but because the heart rate has increased, and actually the amount of blood that's going into that heart has also increased, we call that cardiac output. The amount of blood being pumped out of the heart over a whole minute has increased significantly. So the delivery rate is a lot higher. The other question I get asked quite a lot is, so do we use all of our vessels? Yes, we use all of the vessels. We use all of the veins, all of the venules, all of the capillaries, all of the arterioles and all of the arteries, but not at the same time. We use the large ones all of the time. The smaller ones, the capillaries, are empty sometimes. We only require them, for example, you only require them in your quadriceps if you're using your quadriceps. So there'll be some blood flow around the muscle, but not a great deal. So there's one last video to watch, that's 3 out of 3, and that will cover micro tears and temperature.